Mandatory for you, but you're welcome to come. It's for you. I mean, I will bring movies, or we can discuss stuff. It depends on who's here,
Okay.
what people want to do. But I plan on bringing a movie, a bunch of them, and if you want to see a movie,
Great.
we can vote on it, etc.
But no,
Okay.
it's turned into,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's
Well, that sounds like the best last day
And
of
so-
class, that's for sure.
Because I don't have to fly to Colorado.
Well,
I'll be here.
I'm still hoping that you'll like
As
me.
a-
Remember,
yeah.
the student surveys are
last
posted
Mother's Day
now.
weekend,
Oh,
So you
Yeah,
can do
or
student
those
surveys.
Those are different than last year. So
They
it's,
did change them.
so it is a
I'm like,
real
sure, I'll
email.
go do it.
Like it's not like
I'll
a.
go.
I've been getting like
And so
false
I did really
emails.
well
That's why I was
there.
like,
Ah,
And so-
yeah,
it's
that's
the
scary.
real one.
Jenny
I
runs
would hope
the
so.
party. It's like, are we gonna throw?
Yeah, there
No, I
are
have to
supposed to
run
be
the
different
contest.
this year.
We've already
I think I
agreed
got
to this.
paranoid because like
She's
in my
like, well, you can
Providence
throw in
email,
homework?
they're like, don't
Sure.
open these
And
are
it's the
like
following
phishing
weekend, so I
scams.
convinced my mom
And
to
then
drive
so I'm
down.
like, is this
And I
the
got
course
pissed
that
at
I
9,
want?
Jenny
Or
was our judge. And
But
so
it
she
is.
was
Don't
like,
you have
"You're
to
throwing
go
in Palmer."
into
Well,
Blackboard to
somebody
do
wrote
it?
a 10, da, 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 da.
To do what?
Club
I don't know,
president
I
decided
clicked
she doesn't
it
want to
last
do
time, I
typing and
don't
drumming
think it
anymore,
went
so
into
she's going back
Blackboard
to the
last
10. So
year.
Jenny, as soon as Jenny heard that Joan was
I
moving
thought
back,
you
she
did
was like,
so that
perfect,
you'd be
please don't
safe.
run your 10.
last
Because it
year
would
it
be
didn't go
inside.
into Blackboard. It just like went into a link to
That's
like
awesome.
click the.
That's super
I'll
cool.
check
So
it
is that
right
the
now.
paper toss? Or?
Well, yeah, so there's like 8 events.
There's 8 events.
Yeah,
Island games.
Highland Games. But it's the Scottish event out in Palmer
Oh,
every summer.
oh,
Oh, yeah.
they're usually,
Well, they used to be
Right.
in Eagle River, and then like 2015, we moved them out to the fairgrounds, and we've taken over at least half the grounds. By 20.
that's right, we were there, at least one year it was out at the fairgrounds, and we went and wandered around. We have a friend who, whenever she comes, she times her visit to go to that. And her mother were here, and we went out there, so.
It's a hoot. We've taken all. It starts at Purple Gate, which is where like Slingshot is, and we've got it all the way. We've got vendors all the way through to the roundabout, and then we're sending them now to up towards Red Gate, almost to the reptile house.
When is it?
It's the last weekend in June every year.
Excuse me. Thank you.
And
Okay, so might as well get started on our last section of our last regular class. Wow, that's good. Miss you guys. Yeah.
Are you teaching this again same time next semester?
Yes, actually, I'm
Okay.
scheduled to teach 2 sections of this class. One on Tuesday evening and one on Friday evening. The Friday evening one, I think, will be right here in the same room, I guess, because it'll be in this at the same time. But the Tuesday one, so far, I've only got 4 students signed up in it. So if you know anyone who's over on post, because that one will be in the Elmendorf Education Building. So if you know anyone that needs a philosophy course, it's the first time I've offered it over there for years. So hopefully,
Do you have to have somebody in your class to get a class?
have to have at least the minimum that will pay to run the class. So
Right.
I don't know what that will be. They decide that every semester, whether or not, they don't tell you until it's pretty close. What I've usually offered to do is, if it's low, I'll say, well, I'll do it for less, no problem. And then they cancel the classes that don't have enough, and all those students end up looking around for something, and then I end up with enough students. So that works out pretty well.
Do you have to lower your amount?
Well, I actually enjoy doing this.
I know you do.
I'm torturing
I can
people,
tell.
and that is so much fun.
You're a good
and
teacher.
so,
You are.
I'm also old enough that my pensions, theoretically, are what we could live off of. Of course, my wife is losing her mind, and she's the one that does all the math, so
She does all the
I'm not
bills.
really sure how we're doing, but, oh well.
In the end, it's all material things.
True, true.
Money's immaterial.
Yeah.
But so
Money's
I like doing this because it keeps me sane,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
if that's what sanity is.
Right.
And something you enjoy.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely can tell you like this
Mhm.
topic.
And you're good at
It's-
teaching it.
well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I try, actually. You know,
You are good.
I hope, philosophy, I take philosophy seriously, because you really are messing with people's minds.
Mhm.
And speaking of which, this is Noretta, and she's about, I guess she's in her 70s. And, you know, reading her profile or, you know, or Vita, she sounds an awful lot like me in a lot of ways. You know, now that she's retired, she's planning on spending more time reading the Harry Potter books with her grandchildren.
She should.
And you know, and I think, hey, you know, well, I'm not reading them to my grandchildren because they're not old enough yet, but I'm practicing. You know, I'm on book 4 again, just so
Oh, yeah.
you know. That's what I read before I fall asleep. So
That's what I used to read with
Not Twilight?
no, I never got into Twilight. I know the vampire thing. I should really try that. See if it. My wife has a whole series of books that are about a woman that goes back into time in England.
Outlander.
Outlander,
That I'd recommend Outlander before Twilight.
because she's read all the books,
Well, 9 just came out.
including the books about the books that the author wrote.
And then she's got
the
side
research.
stories too. Yep.
Yep.
Book 9 just came out for pre-order.
Oh dear. Well, there's a Christmas gift. I think.
That's
Yeah, now you know together.
Trouble is, we need less stuff. We're at that point, you know, where
But if you order it
I
from a
remember
bookstore in
you were
Scottsdale,
saying
it
that
comes
you
signed.
have
Mm.
storage of books
we rented a storage thing,
for your books, right?
and we just used that during the summer to try to move enough out that we could get to the piles of books that fell during the earthquake,
Uh-huh.
and we haven't reached it yet.
Okay.
It's pretty bad. We're
One
clearly,
day I hope to like reading so much, I just cannot do it.
mm,
Just so boring.
plus library books. You know, I go
Maybe I just haven't found the right book.
because I like going to.
Probable impossibilities versus improbable possibilities. I feel
See,
like
we
they're
have
the
a
same
thing called the library.
and he doesn't understand English who translated this.
That's how
Oh.
I feel
Okay,
about the
hold
books.
Is that the Schopenhauer?
This is Aristotle, page 615.
Let me go look.
You want me to read it, or would you like to read it? I do like your voice.
Wait, page number again?
615, paragraph 2. Let us then determine what are the circumstances.
6:15.
Okay.
16.
Oh wait, it's technically the third paragraph. The poet should prefer probable impossibilities.
Oh,
On the
second-
right-hand
Oh,
side
on
of
the,
6.
the other column, okay.
The poet should. I've got this underlined, and
Excellent.
I wrote R and J question mark next to it. Romeo and Juliet question mark. The poet should prefer probable impossibilities to improbable possibilities.
I feel like a probable impossibility is an oxymoron, whereas the other one isn't. And it messes with my English mind.
It reminds me of George Bush's Secretary of Defense, I guess, Ashcroft, wasn't it? That said there are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns.
All I can think of
You
is
remember
like,
that?
phonetically
Okay,
thinking like
that makes sense
probable,
though.
like probable impossibilities would be like your common abnormalities. Like, versus your improbable possibilities would be like your super rare diseases.
Interesting.
That's,
Okay.
that's how, like, I would interpret it, and like, when it's talking about like plot lines, like, your probable impossibility is like, it might work, and like, it ends up working type of thing, but your improbable possibility is where like, you make that plot jump and you're like, how on God's green earth did we get from A to B?
Okay, so it's not the
It's-
strict interpretation of the words. It's
No,
that
it's-
of the impossibilities, it was the probable
Yes.
impossibility. Got it.
Yeah.
That'll never happen. On this list of 6 things that'll never happen, probably would have happened.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I would, I think when you like fully look at more like context within the paragraph, rather than just looking at
Yeah.
that sentence, it's more about like looking at it from like a plot device perspective.
You want the absurdity and irrationalness.
Well, he is trying to describe specifically tragedy here.
Right.
So, in a different genre, or if that's what it would be called in, say, comedy, it would certainly be different. What makes a comedy funny, I said the basic plot for a tragedy is that the hero does everything right, but still suffers, dies in the end, right? And you could go through the Greek plays and you see that's precisely what happens. But in a comedy, he says that the hero does everything wrong and still succeeds. And, you know, the perfect example I think of that is the Pink Panther, Inspector Clouseau, right? Who, you know, and like, you know, the scene where they're all trying to murder him, you know, he doesn't even have a clue that he's in danger, and yet just the way he moves, he ends up with all of the murderers who are experts killing one another, and he's not even aware that any of that happened, right? If you remember it, you know, just absolutely slapstick kind of events, you know. You know, he goes into the bathroom stall, and 2 different murderers each go to the stall next to him, and he drops the toilet paper, so you see him, you know, down like this, and they both shoot one another, you know, and then he leaves, and he doesn't even realize, you know, 2 of the international expert murderers have just murdered themselves instead of him. You know, it's just hilarious, right? You know, and so you think what makes it funny to us is, in a sense, we know how logic works. We know that expert murderers are going to get you. I mean, you know, it's just absolutely, you know, hopeless, you know, that they're going to get you, right? And yet it doesn't happen. And you know that that's absolutely, totally ridiculous. And so you laugh at it. Whereas, you know, the tragedy, the thing about that is, you know, the Oedipus does his darndest to make sure that he doesn't satisfy the prophecy, right? That, you know, where he's supposed to be killing his father and marrying his mother. You know, those are both absolutely horrendous. And so he's moved away from the local community, you know, so that he's not going to be in a position to kill his father or marry his mother. But as it happens, father's out there traveling, and they insult one another, and he ends up killing his father, and then I think he brings the body back and apologizes, or I forget how it works, but they don't recognize who he is, but he ends up marrying his mother.
The honorable thing to do, to marry the widow.
And then he ends up the seer who prophesies that points out to him that, you know, see, everything happened just the way it was expected, and once he realizes that, he gouges out his own eyes. You know, so it's.
I mean, that's my gut instinct.
You know, it's a. The whole community would have been just crying, you know, with how horrible it is, right? And of course, the thing is, the Greeks believed that's the way life was. It was like karma, right? You know, that, you know, life is going to, you know, get you, you know, that no matter how you try to avoid your fate, fate's going to, yeah, it's going to happen. And so, you know, we're all going to die, you know, and so the empathy, or the shared empathy, oh gosh, there's it's called catharsis, right?
Right.
That everybody shares. That was actually a religious event for people, because it made them feel strong as a community. We feel that. I mean, I still remember George Bush standing in New York on the rubble and saying, they're going to hear us soon, you know, and everybody just, you know, we were so angry, you know, that, you know, the terrorists had, you know, done what they done and accomplished that. We're going to go bomb the shit out of somebody, you know. We'll get them, you know, and we're all like, yeah, you know. There were, of course, some folks that was, hey, wait a minute, we don't know who it is. You can't have a war against terror because terror is a verb, you know.
And English majors.
Ruining all the fun.
I have to admit, though, I was like, whoa, you know, I felt like we are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. Oh, well, maybe not. But, you know, it was, you know, like, yeah, we're, you know, go team, go, you know. Seriously, though, because it's, you know, a lot of dead people. We were pissed off.
It's personal.
And George did a good job of standing out there and, you know, mission accomplished.
I don't remember where I heard this from, but this was just over Thanksgiving break. It was in the news that this lady died, and you know, when the police came and, you know, but they found that her husband died 11 years ago, but she never reported it, and he was in the freezer the whole time.
Oy.
Yeah.
Maybe
Where
she
was that?
busy. I mean, you never had a
Didn't
pet
have
pass
time.
away in the winter and you're
Saves
like,
money,
"Wanna go
really.
outside?"
Saves money. He
No,
needs.
but I had somebody was dog sitting for her. She was like, we're going on a trip for 2 weeks. You know, if the dog dies, just put him in a trash bag and put him in the freezer. I'm like, you can't
Whoa.
pay me enough
Wow.
To
for
do
that
that.
service.
You thought she was awesome.
I had done that
Gross.
service before. The dog was in the bag was in the freezer. And we know when spring comes,
I guess
I'll
those
dig
are
a
the
hole
same
for you.
people who stick their husbands in the freezer. I don't know, but yeah.
And I only charge $25 an hour.
How big are these freezers, though? That's,
6
If you
feet
think about it, though,
by
in
26
Alaska,
inches
those deep
by 32
freezers
inches.
for a whole moose, I mean, I can hold
Nope.
a person, but
They
just
were gonna get a
crazy.
phone call. They were gonna have to come back. Every time the dog would just sort of lay down for just way too long.
okay,
Still
but
Yeah.
back to messing with your minds, you know. And so this is wrestling with the postmodern, or the social, what the heck? I'm in the wrong page here.
And we're moving
Oh.
out Aristotle.
Wrestling with the social constructor,
Ooh,
right? So what is this about? Well, social construction, right? So I'm sure we've mentioned this. I didn't, wait a minute.
I don't know, but after reading the Aristotle one, I was like, man, I want to write a tragedy. It
I
inspired
remember
me.
if
I think I can do this.
no, I didn't remember it exactly. But, the social construction of reality. I'm sure we mentioned this. The book by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman. There it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that anymore. That's a really old paperback. The cover that I have, from when I bought it, but they have newer versions of it because it's still available. Usually, at least, I think. If not in Barnes and Ignobles, you'd at least find a copy, I'm sure, in Tidal Wave, for probably pretty cheap. And you may feel insulted reading it, by the way, though, because it's a male-oriented text. I think I mentioned that I used it as a text for teenagers in APU in the early honors program that I did years ago. And I assigned that as a book, and a couple of the girls pointed out that they were insulted because it was all male oriented, you know, all the
Yeah.
pronouns, you know, et cetera, right?
Oh, whatever.
And then I realized, ooh, yeah, I guess so. Sorry about that. And you can't just say, just update it, you know, in your mind, you know.
In front of all the
Yeah,
pages.
yeah. But nonetheless, the point of the work is very, very Hegelian. You know, so if you think, you know, this kind of modern post-Hegel attitude that I keep talking about, basically is more the vocabulary really is much better in a book like this, where you talk about how sociology does an analysis of, you know, a cultural group. What do they believe? How do they talk? You know, all the elements that go into structuring our social space, our conceptual space, right? And how that conceptual space then basically is the world for us, right?
Yeah.
And it's not static, it's changing. You know, Facebook didn't used to exist not really very long ago, and in fact it constantly changes. It's updated, they change they get in trouble in Europe because of privacy issues, and so they change it. Yes, they're making money off of us. Yes, we're doing stuff, and then they're selling our big data or whatever they make money off of, and then yes, we're targeted, you know, with ads and everything.